Okay, so I had this idea, which is along the lines of seeing what the differences are between ISFJs and INFJs. And Eric here is an ENTP. He's due to marry Kimberly, ISFJ, and he's been interacting with me for about a month and a half now.
Talking, talking with famous people.
And I was curious as to what his perspective would be on the differences, similarities, differences between the two of us, and also linking that to similarities, differences from my perspective between SI, and FE in the two of us. I should just say one thing, which is I'm still working out if I am definitely an INFJ. So I thought this would definitely help the process of working out whether it's true.
All right, so the first table is split into two columns: commonality and then the explanation. So, in which ways are NI and SI common? They're both what I call epistemology functions. They're knowing functions. So, one commonality is they deny the observer. For both NI and SI, the agent self is assumed irrelevant, and the agent self's perspective is epistemologically unprocessed. In other words, the knowledge I know is accepted as objectively certain, and thus my own biases don't come into play. Contrast against, say, FE, which must consider my perspective, agent observer, a subject's perspective, agent subject, and the perspective of the one acted upon, agent object. For NI or SI, it's known. Like, for example, I know I ate a honey bun this morning. We have this box of honey
Mhm.
buns. I know that. I'm not thinking, let me see, am I too biased to remember correctly that I ate a honey bun? That's SI, okay? And
Mhm.
similarly, I might know that this is for making a fire or something. That's NI, in the sense that I know something objectively about the world. So,
Mhm.
another commonality is that they make predictions. Both knowing functions provide a framework for managing events across time and begin with one or the other manner of permanence as an underlying engine. Knowing supervenes on permanence, and permanence supervenes upon collected and compared statuses. Supervenes is a word that just means uh, it relies upon the existence of the former to enable the existence of the latter to occur.
Mhm.
Um, and so in that instance, it's like both knowledge functions. Because I know I ate a honey bun this morning, I can predict that there's one fewer honey bun in the box next time I go to visit it. That would be an example of using knowledge to make predictions. And then
Mhm.
the third commonality is that they maintain self concept. Both knowing functions maintain identity by linking meanings between experience and self concept. Knowing is an expression of self, it never occurs outside. So even though you
Mhm.
might know things about the outside world, the knowing itself is internal, and that's an expression of ontology or existence as an entity.
Okay. So I've just looked at that table and I've got a few questions. The first is about denying the observer. Um, how is SI and NI specifically denying the observer? Because the way that you framed it is that they know that they may have eaten something or they know something else about whatever else it might be. But how specifically don't they reference to themselves? Because surely they are referencing to their own experience.
Well, they're referencing their own experience, but the thing they're referencing isn't subject to dispute. Your judgment, then you're saying, well, okay, is this true or is this not true? Is this legitimate in some fashion, depending on what your legitimacy metric is? But if you're knowing something, you're just saying, I'm working, work, all my ontological work is
Hmm.
on that thing has already been done.
Right. So if I'm hearing this correctly, and it just popped into my head, and I just looked at the title, so denying the observer, what it sounds like is not necessarily that it's uh, a pure denial of the observer, but it's as though there's a collapsing of the observer into what's observed, so into what's known. So they can't be like split apart and then question whether this person is actually seeing or knowing what they're seeing, but they're so together that it just seems as though they're one. So the experience for an SI user is that they've eaten something, and the knowledge of the other or whatever it might be that the NI user has an observation of is definite because they're collapsed together with it. Is
But
that is, is
sort
that what you
of,
mean?
sort of. But I would say that the distinction is that with SI, there's more of an acceptance that you might be wrong. So while I'm certain I ate a honey bun this morning, I'm not quite as certain what I had yesterday morning, maybe. Or actually, I am. I had a bagel and cream cheese yesterday morning. But I'm not certain what I had the morning before. I'm less certain. And I know that the further I go back, that my memory is less reliable.
This is for the SI user.
This is for the SI user. So SI, as a way of knowing, is more particularist. It accepts that it's less certain, but it denies as a default the observer. In other words, if I don't have a reason to question my memory, then I will assume it's true. In contrast, the NI user is also on some level denying, because what they observe to be true about the external world, they assume to be about the external world. But the knowing still occurs within the individual, and NI knowledge can be wrong too.
For the SI user, if this is now and this is going back in the past, the more recent the event is, the more familiar they are and the more certain they are. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's a recency bias with SI.
Is that why SI is impressionistic? Because it's actually blurring all of these different points together into one sort of like entity, which is impressionistic?
It creates events out of smaller events, basically, and creates nodes of knowledge that are based on memories. Now, depending on your other functions, Kimberly as an SI dominant is much more knowledge, has much more knowledge that's constructed out of experiences and extrapolated experiences. And she's learning and becoming more NE, being with me, as I'm becoming more SI. So I'm prioritizing my own experiences and extrapolations from those and recognizing that I do that more thoroughly now, and she's becoming more ideationally engaged. So she understands that just because I did it this way before doesn't mean I'm going to do it every time that way now. That's part of her experience. She's experienced NE more, so it frees her from her SI defaults.
I've known an SJ, ISJ, so another SI dom. There can be a pattern which is a pattern of behavior and pattern of familiarity. And even if it's a destructive pattern or something which isn't as optimal as it could be, it's still maintained because it's what's familiar and what is known.
Yes.
And to actually ask an SI user to actually move away from that pattern, whatever it might be, is very, very difficult for the SI user because it's so ingrained and embedded, and every new day that it's experienced as such is it's a new day where it strengthens as being the way to do something. What's your take on that, Kim?
It's extremely uncomfortable, and I'm learning in my relationship with Eric, it's the first time I've ever encountered a person that is solely on my side. And even though I know that, and I'm seeing this pattern over the last year, he and I will both catch me not wanting to trust in it, and it's totally default, and we have to work through that.
Yeah, because what's interesting from the SJ that I know is if you challenge that like regularly embedded pattern, there's a sense of sort of like, oh shit, what do I do now, when that familiarity is sort of like either adjusted or disrupted in some manner. But what I've also noticed is that if you give that SJ user enough data points from which they can then compile upon going into the future this way. So, for example, with your relationship with Eric, I get the sense that sort of like the very first time is ambiguity, but the next time along, there's less ambiguity, there's less ambiguity, there's less ambiguity, which builds its way into the future.
Yes.
And it's a reestablishment of a new pattern, which then allows the SI to have something new to actually firmly cling on to, or something new to actually know. Do you think that's true?
It is true, but I still find that it may not even be less the next time or even the next time. I do a lot of tricking myself, or even tricking Eric, whereas I'll say, okay, fine, and I will go along with it, and even though I'm not comfortable with it, I'll sit with it in my gut, and it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel comfortable, But as it plays out and I start to see it unfold, and it gets more comfortable. So it's not really a particular situation that gets comfortable. It's the next situation that becomes more comfortable.
That's really, really interesting, because it's as though it links to what Eric was just showing us in that table, that there is that predictive aspect of sort of like, well, this has happened before. Sorry, this has happened before, therefore it's likely to happen again. And the more that you compile this way into the past, the more that this step into the future seems to become more and more comfortable. Would you say that's...
Well, because I
is
need
that
to see the physical examples. Like a really good
Right.
example was Eric and I in the beginning of our relationship.
Uh-huh.
I watched videos of him and what it was that he believed he wanted and needed and was going to find in a woman. And then he and I got together, and it was exactly that. When we got together, he laid it out on the table exactly what it was that he was going to expect of me. And rather than me like saying, okay, I'm all in, I told him I was all in, but I wasn't all in. I needed to see the example. And so in order to be with him, I had to kind of like just sit back and say, yeah, oh yeah, I love you too. And oh yeah, we're going to get married. And oh yeah, this is forever. And oh yeah, I don't want anybody else. But I had to play along with him until I could actually see the physical, I needed to see him show me
Yeah.
those examples. I couldn't just hear them.
Whereas for me, the words were good enough. That's all I really needed. Talking with famous people.